The other purpose of this occasion is to hear a reflection from an alumnus of the institution to tell his or her story as a point of inspiration for all of us. This occasion was begun in 1940 and has been going on continuously since that time. It was started to reflect and commemorate and give appreciation for the life of the longest-serving president in the Academy's history, Colonel John Woodward, who established Georgia Military Academy in 1900 and died in 1939. He was succeeded by his son-in-law, Colonel Brewster, and then by his grandson as president, who served from 1960 to 1975, Captain William R. Brewster, Jr. We are fortunate today to have members of Captain Brewster's family with us. His daughter, Susan, who is a Woodward alumna, and her daughter, Paige Patterson, who is also a Woodward alumna. Will the two of you please stand and let us recognize you? Sadly for us, Captain Brewster died a little bit over a month ago, just beyond 90 years of age. We thought we would depart from tradition, and today, instead of having an alumnus talk about his or her life, ask an alumnus of the institution to talk about another alumnus of the institution. In this instance, to have you hear more about one of the true founders of Woodward Academy, Captain Brewster. So Woodward alumnus of 1973, Mr. Rusty Zaring, has agreed to come and share some reflections with you. Mr. Zaring graduated himself from Woodward, has two children who are vintage Eagles of Woodward, has served at Woodward most of his professional life, teaching in social studies, where he chaired the department for 14 years. In addition, he is the official archivist for the Academy. He is the person who has written the definitive history on Woodward Academy, which was published in the year 2000. So, Rusty, we look forward to hearing from you and learning more about Captain Brewster and what he meant to this institution. And I invite the audience to join me in welcoming you and thanking you for your time with us.
Thank you, Dr. Gulley. It's a great honor for me to be here today as an alumnus and a very long-time faculty member. As some of you students already know, I take considerable pleasure in talking about the history of the school and in collecting artifacts for the archives, too. This is a special Founders Day for all of us because we have chosen to focus our attention on one extraordinary man, Captain William R. Brewster, Jr., who dedicated the majority of his life to building this school and who served honorably and successfully as the third president of GMA Woodward Academy for 2 decades through the turbulent 1960s and 1970s. We do this because I believe most students recognize the name on the front of Brewster Hall, but they know little about the man behind it. And because we are saddened that just a few weeks ago, on August 26th, Captain Brewster passed away at the age of 90. One of the highlights of my professional career came in 1998 when I arranged an interview with Captain Brewster as a part of an oral history program for the archives. I loaded a new, bulky old camcorder onto a school van, and I journeyed hours to St. Mary's on the coast in extreme South Georgia, very near the Kings Bay nuclear subbase, where Captain Brewster and his wife, Kitty, were living in retirement. Although we've known each other for 30 years since my days as a student, and he hired me as a teacher too, I think we both felt a little bit uneasy about this interview. He seemed to be uncertain about the rectitude of my intentions, and I was just plain scared because, after all, this was Captain Brewster, the unquestioned commanding force behind Woodward Academy. I set the video equipment up the best I could in a conference room he had reserved at a local library where everyone knew him. He was extremely gracious, and things went very smoothly. For the next 4 days, I asked him every question I could possibly think about his family, his life, and the history of the school. His answers were direct, Sometimes his stories were humorous, sometimes quite emotional. When we had finished, I had over 12 hours of dialogue on tape. I believe in the future, this video may be one of the most important artifacts we have in the archives. For me, this was an extraordinary experience, and I took away from it a much greater appreciation of Captain Brewster as a gentleman and his decisive role in the development of the school that we have today. Let me briefly share with you just a little bit of what I learned. Captain Brewster's grandfather was Colonel John Charles Woodward, who, along with his wife, Lucille, founded Georgia Military Academy in 1900. As GMA's first president, for 39 years, he nursed the school through periods of steady growth and economic depression. He was a fascinating man who lived during fascinating times, but that's another story for another time. Captain Brewster's father was Colonel William R. Brewster, a tough, intimidating, spit and shine West Point graduate who was married to Colonel Woodward's daughter, Mildred. Colonel Brewster became GMA president when Woodward died in 1939, and with fierce dedication to military education. He marched the school through the World War II era in the 1940s and the Korean War era in the 1950s. Captain Brewster was born on November 6, 1921, at Fort McPherson Hospital. His family lived in Colonel Woodward's large house on campus, although he actually alternated periods living across the street in the school dormitories. I think he picked up some bad habits there. He first attended public school, but in 1928 his father enrolled him in GMA as a second grade cadet. He said he was thrilled because he got to wear the GMA uniform and he felt like a man. He graduated with a classical diploma in 1937 when he was only 15 years old, and you can see his diploma in the lobby. Because he was too young for a service academy, he spent another postgraduate year at GMA. That was not unusual. In 1938, he was admitted to the United States Naval Academy as a member of the class of 1942. But history interfered when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Brewster's graduation at Annapolis was accelerated to December 19th. He was quickly commissioned a naval officer, and in just a few short weeks, he was on active duty. For the next 5 years, he served his country with distinction as an officer on 2 naval destroyers in battles in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. He twice was decorated for valor in combat with the Silver Star in 1943 and the Bronze Star in 1945. He concluded the war in naval aviation. When the war ended and he left active duty, Captain Brewster contemplated a career as a commercial pilot, but he decided to return to the family business here at GMA in College Park, and it truly was a family business. Throughout the 1950s, he served in numerous administrative positions, always under the watchful command of his father. He learned all about the school, and he worked his way up the leadership ladder. As vice president of the school, he assumed control when his father took an extended leave of absence in 1959. Then, when his father retired in 1960, Captain Brewster was selected as GMA's third president. This now became a decisive and controversial moment of generational change for Georgia Military Academy. Over the past decade, the younger Brewster had gradually come to question the long-term viability of the military school his father had so doggedly guarded for 20 years. We have a plethora of strong historical evidence in the archives from letters, essays, school evaluations, presidential reports, and interviews, which show clearly that Captain Brewster had become convinced that bold and courageous change was needed if the school were to survive and flourish. 4 issues seem to have most influenced him in his thinking. First, economics. Always calling himself more of a businessman than an educator, Captain Brewster knew that GMA was struggling financially. Revenues had fallen throughout the 1950s and donations were rare. He was convinced that better schools had more money and GMA needed more money. There were also powerful social political forces at work in the early 1960s that might undermine a school like GMA. Brewster and the board recognized the inevitability of the civil rights movement and desegregation, and they were concerned that compliance, or non-compliance for that matter, would cause the government to withdraw financial support for the ROTC program, making it totally financially unfeasible to continue funding the school's military department. The gradual emergence of the controversial Vietnam War also threatened to exacerbate the downward trend in enrollment that all military schools had been suffering since the unpopular Korean War in the early 1950s. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, Captain Brewster was concerned about the overall quality of the academic program at GMA in light of the increasing standards for college admissions in the 1960s. He once wrote that GMA aspired to be not the best military school, but the best college prep school, period. He had become convinced that the financial necessities at GMA had caused admissions and curriculum compromises that undermined the overall quality of education. For these reasons, after becoming president in 1960, he immediately began to tactfully nudge the board toward changes that would eventually drastically alter the course of the school and would arouse strong opposition. The first change came in 1964, when Brewster convinced the board to admit the first female students. In a letter to parents, friends, and alumni dated May 5, 1964, and you can see this in the lobby, he announced the decision, basically arguing that the school could upgrade its academics by replacing some dumb boys who had been admitted for financial reasons with some smart girls from the Atlanta area. With a completely straight face, he also wrote that, quote, "A few girls will result in a more genteel atmosphere and project an academic image to the public that might also attract and hold good teachers." He added that GMA cadets, whom he called the GMA product, needed to be around some girls in high school so that they wouldn't be so distracted when they encountered them in college. So, in August 1964, 30 girls were admitted, including Brewster's daughter, Susan. Needless to say, many alumni and cadets were horrified. Over the next few years, Captain Brewster began to lobby the board for the most profound change of all, the total elimination of the military program upon which the school had been founded. Again, fierce opposition on the board, among the alumni, and even at home from his own father. Brewster barely won approval for this radical change. Most interestingly, in another letter dated May 1964, and you can see this in the lobby also, announcing that GMA would now become Woodward Academy in August of '66, Brewster cited only academic reasons. The military program, he argued, simply took too much time away from the rigorous academic preparation and constricted the curriculum to exclude more diverse studies, especially fine arts, which students increasingly needed for college admissions. He assured parents in this letter that non-military uniforms would still be worn, patriotism would be stressed, and fair discipline would remain. Especially no beatnik haircuts would be tolerated. It was a courageous decision by Captain Brewster, and many loyal friends of the school were appalled. Many alumni felt sold out. Some never forgave him. A lawsuit was actually brought to block the change and was narrowly defeated in court. Now Brewster orchestrated a tidal wave of change as Woodward Academy was born in the 1960s. An entire new identity had to be created. New uniforms, new yearbook, the Phoenix, new student newspaper, the Blade, new alma mater, new school mascot, War Eagle, new curriculum, new advertising, new everything. And a lot of new buildings were needed too. Brewster initiated the first capital campaign in the school's history and raised money to modernize the facilities. With the support of the board and alumni philanthropist Robert W. Woodruff and Michael C. Carlos, whose statues are on campus, Brewster constructed or renovated over a dozen buildings, which today remain the core of our campus, including Brewster Hall, the original Richardson Hall, Gresham Chapel, Carlos Administration Building, the Paget Gymnasium and the Cecil Kennedy Swimming Pool, the McKay Hall Library, the Rutland Infirmary, which is the IT building today, Colquitt Stadium, Woodruff Dining Hall, Alumni Hall, which is the front of the History Building today, Tucker Lower School, and the Brand Middle School. But Brewster did more than just build buildings. He also initiated programs which still are at the heart of Woodward today. He dramatically expanded the fine arts program in the newly constructed Richardson Hall. He began WATV. He originated the Learning Disabilities program. He started the middle school. He bought the school's first computer. It was huge. It wrapped around an entire building underneath the computer lab today. He joined the Georgia High School Association in sports, and Woodward immediately began winning state championships in many sports, including football in 1970. He built the first satellite school, the Busey School, in Riverdale. And that's only part of it. So you can see it's most appropriate today, on Founders Day, that we honor Captain Brewster, because in a profound way, he was the founder of the modern Woodward Academy. In 1978, he was voted a distinguished alumnus for his decades of outstanding service to the school. You can see his certificate in the lobby. In 1979, after 20 energetic and tiring years, Captain Brewster retired as president. In May of 2000, the school recognized a lifetime of contributions by Captain Brewster and his wife Kitty by dedicating in his honor the Captain's Clock. So now when you arrive early in the morning and you walk through the gates of Brewster Hall and you hear the Captain's Clock chime across the campus, you can appreciate the man behind it all. Thank you and happy Founders Day.